Welcome to the Critical Few Actions to Improve Your Business podcast. I'm John Downs and I'm here to help you cut through the overwhelm and prioritise what matters most to improve your business. Let's get started and discover the critical few actions that have the biggest impact. Greg Weston joined his father's struggling business when he returned from a year and a half travelling around the world after he finished his university course. It's only through sheer hard work, determination, and also through forming a fantastic partnership that he's turned this into a business that makes chemicals that go around Australia and around the world, so the mining and agricultural sector, and is an employer of over 30 employees in Sunshine, Victoria. Greg, welcome.
Thank you, John.
So Greg, tell me a bit about your story. How did you get into the business after you came back?
Well, as you said, it was very much an accident. When I traveling around the world was something I always wanted to do, and I really did have maybe the time of my life, I guess, or certainly the time of my life up until then. But as we will remember, there was a recession in 1990 when I returned, a big recession. No jobs in the newspaper. I didn't have any credibility, really. If I wanted to employ someone who was probably more interested in travel than getting a job. I became my father's second employee and I didn't have a care in the world. It's funny how I look back on that startup business. It was going downhill very quickly. Didn't worry me, but I guess I had nothing to lose. But anyway, my father was trying to work out how to make a commodity wetting agent. Managed to do that in the lab, and coincidentally, someone gave us a tip off that a large mining company was about to close on a tender. We weren't even in the mining industry. We were in the textile industry at the time, and that's where it was going to go. I spent half a day on the telephone trying to find someone to talk to in this mining company. No one knew the chemical name. I didn't know any brand names. But anyway, I found someone to talk to, submitted a price. We hadn't even made a batch yet in the plant. We won the tender on the basis of just a price. First batch, which wouldn't have passed any quality standards today, went up to P&G and I went up there with it, tried it out and it worked. And that doubled the business overnight and really started my career. But I guess even then, for a long time, it was still only a temporary job to me. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. Not that I was really looking elsewhere, but I just sort of was tied up in the moment and just kept on plugging away and gradually growing the business over the 90s.
So over that first 5 to 10 years, your father had a factory that you were renting and manufacturing from some fairly rudimentary equipment, I take it.
So pretty rudimentary by today's standards. We didn't have much in the way of scrubbers. And I was very naive about what the industry required. And I wasn't even aware that we had to have the factory bunded for spill protection.
Right.
That's how basic my knowledge was. So it was a period of a lot of learning very much in the area, though, of operational things. So how to be a chemical engineer instead of a mechanical engineer.
Yes, because you weren't trained as a chemical engineer, were you?
No, that's right. Yeah. Falling back on my high school chemistry and really making that go as far as it could.
And your dad was a chemist, was he, by training? Or?
He was an industrial chemist. He wasn't as, some ways he probably could have taught me a little bit more. I guess maybe he was a little bit worn out with being in business and not having seen it go so well. But nevertheless, we still worked as a team. And I guess I became the person who ran the company within a couple of years. And very gradually, we started to put some more people on to free me up to do other things. But I remained very much an operational person for quite a long time and not really a business person.
And so was he driving the sales, or you were both driving the sales, or really focused on the chemistry? How did that work?
I guess my father looked after the accounts more than anything else and some of the purchasing, and gradually pulled back from the business because I think by then he might have been about 65 or thereabouts and probably wanted to retire. So he really pulled away from it. I looked after sales. Not sure if I did that good a job of it, but nevertheless, we still grew. And I looked elsewhere in the mining industry. We picked up another very large customer, also in P&G, and gradually got into the alumina processing industry as well. Did okay at expanding into the mining sector in particular. Not very successful in the textile sector or the other area we were traditionally in was industrial lubricants. So I wasn't able to expand that very successfully. I think as lack of chemistry skills and product development skills hindered me there.
So that as you got through the 90s, the business was then on a reasonably firm financial footing?
Yes, it probably took about 5 years before we became financially stable. We moved from Gisborne in the country to Melbourne probably only about 2 years after I joined, and that paid for itself in transport cost savings fairly quickly. I guess that was probably one early example where I did look at business management. So I was looking at the financial side reasonably carefully there. So we moved into a rented factory in Melbourne. By the late 90s, we picked up a large contract, not a large contract in the mining industry, and that funded the purchase of a block of land and construction of a dedicated factory where we are now in Sunshine West. And I guess we grew from there. But it was certainly a gradual change of lots of learning. Probably fairly early on, though, even though I say I was very much an operational person and not a business management person, I nevertheless gradually came to the realization that I needed to acquire more skills in running a business that I didn't have. And I remember, I don't know exactly when, but I did a course on accounting, double entry accounting, and understanding how to read a balance sheet and a P&L statement. And that was probably one of the most important business management skills I picked up. Again, it was probably suited my personality and skills as a sort of a scientific, mathematical type mind. Didn't tell me much about how to manage people, for example, but nevertheless, I had this view that I needed to run a business a little bit more. And yeah, so anyway, we had this brand new factory in Sunshine West, which was another springboard for further growth.
Yeah. And so you got to a point where the business was reasonably stable. You're probably starting to exhaust your knowledge of chemistry.
Yeah.
How did you then progress?
The first thing was, yes, I definitely knew I was really weak on product development and probably fairly weak on sales as well. And I had this frustration in my mind that I knew I could make things. I knew enough engineering, and even with the products we did have, I was always thought there'd be new markets or customers. I just didn't know where they were. We did enter a business partnership with another chemist, PhD qualified chemist, who had particular expertise in one type of chemistry. That didn't work out for cultural reasons. We were different people. We had different ethics, I guess, on running a business. And that dissolved after a couple of years. He's gone on to have his own company. And one thing I was fortunate enough to do was I took some advice. And when we did put him on, we formed a partnership in a separate company, not part of Tritech Chemical, but we had a separate company. In the event of splitting up, it was actually relatively easy to exit. So anyway, that was good.
And that's actually a really important point. And we were talking about this before.
Yeah.
We've always got to think about the exits that may happen because they are going to happen.
That's right. Yes. Yeah, that's true. Many years later, we actually had another partner in the late 2010s. We acquired a partner who didn't really fit with the culture of our company at the time. And that was able to be excised with a good legal agreement that had been set up. But anyway, I did meet my business partner, James Knight, in the roughly early 2000s, and I saw in James someone who knew chemistry, knew how to sell, knew how to develop markets, and was a person who really fitted with my values. I really like the guy. He's very straightforward, very honest, but an opposite personality to me, very much an extrovert and much more of a people person. Technical skills, fantastic chemistry skills.
Yeah.
And he'd left his large employer. He was working on his own in a company that was smaller than us at the time, and we decided to work together. So we bought out his small company and he bought into our company. And that was perhaps one of the most important steps I think we've ever made, maybe the most important step. And we grew somewhat from there.
Right. Okay. And so that started in 2000
I think it was roughly 2005, 2006. Yeah. I should remember these.
So then over a 20-year period, you guys formed a really close and successful partnership. So how did that sort of get started? Once you merged your businesses or acquired, then what happened?
James started with looking at our current customer list. He approached a customer that I thought had stopped buying from us for whatever reason. I don't know why, and picked up a massive amount of business straight away. That was an indication of my neglect of or inability to sell. I just wasn't thorough enough in dealing with the customers. He was able to, and he found other customers as well. One thing he was very good at, though, was selling, and this might sound like it's ripping off customers, but getting better prices for our products.
He understood the value of what they were buying and what the value of the rest of the market was prepared to pay about ripping off. It's actually just a matter of actually something I see so many businesses do is recognize what the value is that they're actually sitting on.
Yes, yeah.
As opposed to just purely understanding what it cost us and we have to make a margin on it.
Sure. Yeah, there was a gradual realization that it wasn't just a matter of making chemicals and selling them for what on the face of it looked like a reasonable margin. There was much more to it than that. I think what I gradually realized is that it wasn't just that margin that we wanted to make. We also wanted to professionalize the business somewhat more, particularly in its perception to the outside world. To do that, we needed more resources in the company, putting more effort into having very good customer service. So having very good logistics support, good support on supplying material safety data sheets and any other documentation that the customer might require. One of the reasons I wasn't successful early on was not being seen as credible by customers. And I think James added credibility to that. Well, it wasn't just his personality, but it was what we provided to the customer. I guess I can give an example where it didn't work out in the 90s. We still had a reasonable amount of business selling carding lubricants for wool carding.
Yeah.
And we thought we would try to develop other carding lubricants for the fine merino wool. So we were initially into carbon yarns, and then we thought we'd look at the bigger market in Australia for merino carding.
Right.
And we developed some products and we thought they were pretty good, but we could never really get past the front door.
Right.
And it was because we were just small. It was just me. We didn't have a reputation. And for the customer, there was a cost in actually trying our products. They would have to, if it didn't work, it cost them many thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
But even just the administrative cost of organizational cost of running trials. So that was completely unsuccessful. And that's one of the things that made me realize that how you are seen by the market and your customers is absolutely critical to the way your business performs. And I think James was particularly instrumental in developing.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, as the business evolved, you grew your range of products and diversified your types of clients. And as a result of that, it became a complex business from the point of view of the supply chain became more complex. You were importing raw materials as well as using locally sourced raw materials.
Yes, we did. Yep. A lot of
you were having to manufacture to much higher standards and to demonstrable standards, and actually had to have proper quality assurance processes wrapped around it. And then you actually also getting the product to the customers. I mean, you are now selling products around the world as well as around Australia. Is that right?
Not a huge amount around the world. We still had sales in Papua New Guinea, and at various times we had sales in other Asian countries. We had a fair bit of business in Hong Kong for a while. We're a wedding agent.
Right.
I think that was ultimately textiles, but probably competition from Southeast Asia beat us there. But anyway, that didn't matter too much. In more recent years, regional sales into the States. So that requires a fair bit of logistics organisation.
So you were shipping and you were training and you were trucking.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, 3 different types. We're using every mode of transport available.
Apart from telepathy.
Yes.
If you really want to kick off your strategic planning and work in a supportive environment with other CEOs and leaders, the CEO Masterclass in Strategic Planning and Implementation is for you. This 10-month small group course helps you craft your strategic plan, present it to a group of peer investors, and develop a habit of monthly implementation. Our waitlist is open now at CriticalFewActions.com.au. So what were the next couple of major milestones in the development of the business sector?
Yeah, well, that knowledge about how to run the chemical plant, even though it was a detailed operational thing and something that perhaps myself as the MD didn't really need to do, I still did. Someone had to do it. So the plant got better and our capabilities got better. And that did enable us to increase the range of products we could make and therefore sell. And we decided to invest in, someone gave me some advice and said, you've got these 3,000 litre vessels, why are you sticking with such a small size, with such small size reactors? It's costing you a lot of labour. And I thought to myself, or realised, I'm only doing this out of habit. And we decided to upscale everything quite a bit. So our typical reactors now are 14,000 to 25,000. So that was one change. Think about cost of production and don't trivialise the labour cost of smaller batches because it is important.
Yeah.
But we also invested in capability to make some high temperature products. James and I were aware of some products that required high temperatures, so we needed a different type of heating and vacuum capability, which was new to us at the time. That particular reactor that was put in was never actually successful in making those particular chemical called esters at the time. And it was sort of a little bit disappointing, or at the time it was, but the capability was recognized by a future customer when on a plant tour.
Mm.
And with that plant, we were able to make a new product, which we'd never made before for a large Australian company.
Mm.
And I think that was roughly about the time I met you, John, very roughly. And that really gave the business a massive kickstart, another kickstart for a number of years. So sometimes it can be investing in capability, can pay a dividend, even if you're not sure what it is at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that reactor ended up doing something it wasn't meant to do, but it did a great job anyway. We also, probably a little bit later, we swapped out one of our reactors for a very large reactor, 25,000 up from 12,000. We did that on the promise of business from one of our large customers in the mining industry. And that never really took off, although it has taken off in more recent years. But that reactor, again, wasn't employed in the mining industry. We found use for it in another industry, as it turned out. So again, an example of investment in plant allowing us to grow the business.
Yeah. And I think also around the time that we met, and I hope it wasn't because of me, you also lost a large, significant client. What did you learn from that process?
That was the product I was just talking about that gave a kickstart. So maybe I'm slightly out of my timing, but we had a lot of business at the time for that client. We did know that it might have been temporary because we were essentially a pilot plant for them to put their own plant in.
Yeah.
We did see it coming to some extent, but we realized we had to pivot. We had to do something. And we thought about the ag sector. We know that there was chemistry in the ag sector that was reasonably close to what we could do. And we started to do some experimentation on making our methyloleate, one of the key adjuvant ingredients in the ag sector. And we picked up business very quickly, actually. We worked out how to make it. And I guess I'm not sure what hole in the market we filled, but I think there was a growing market anyway. And that really, I think we had a downturn of maybe a year or so, or a little bit less. And we launched into the ag sector fairly quickly. And that's been successful, very successful ever since.
Yeah, well, it's a cornerstone of the business now.
Yeah, it is.
I guess it was fortuitous in some ways that changing your customers' demand dropped so quickly. And in some ways forced you to look at new markets.
It did. There's nothing like a bit of pressure to really force you to look at your business very hard.
Well, it was certainly an uncomfortable period, as I recall.
Yes, yeah, it was. Yes, yeah.
And I guess that sort of comes to the question around how has mentorship helped you over the course of this journey?
It's a little bit like that said early on. One thing I realized I needed to do was to acquire more skills. And I'm going to make this a little bit of a longer answer, I guess. But as we grew the company, we realized we needed to find people to do different things. So we at one stage, we put on a chemist. That was James's suggestion. Actually, I didn't realize we needed a chemist, but James did. And, that became very useful. We put on someone much better at bookkeeping. So someone who really understood accounting. And that was very important as well. So we acquired skills that way. We also acquired skills by outsourcing. I was aware that some of our consultants weren't very good. We had an accountant early on who really wasn't very good at all. I really pressured my father back then. That was still in the 90s. Well, I said, look, we've really got to get a better accountant than this. Same with lawyer. We didn't really have a lawyer. Oh, no, we might have actually, but we did find a new lawyer who was very good. Not so much for litigation or anything like that, but more for helping us with agreements and having a different sort of thinking. But it was in the area of skills of understanding myself and understanding management that I probably didn't think enough about for a long time. And later on in finding a mentor, that's when I realized that it's one thing to acquire these readily defined skills such as accounting or chemistry or engineering or welding, but the big picture of how to run a company was not something I've really looked at. And it's probably one of the most important changes I've made in the business. And it saw an evolution in the way I ran the business. I think back then when I met you, John, we didn't really have much of an idea of where our future was. We didn't really have a strategic plan, for example, or much of a vision. Getting that put together was very important and helped change the thinking of the company. So it's a hard thing for me to define what a mentor has done because, again, I'm very much an engineering person who just thinks of numbers. So there's one call them soft skills there. They're not the skills that are native to me, but nevertheless very important.
Good. And so you got through the 90s through really up until 2010, and then how did the business then start to shift? Because you were starting to do some pretty reasonable numbers.
Yes, yeah.
But then over a course of 5 years and then the next 5 years, you doubled the business essentially.
Yeah. It's mostly been increasing penetration into the two biggest sectors. We're still in the agriculture sector and the mining sector. So business relationships with our largest distributor in the mining sector became very important, and in the ag sector, both sectors really. But an example, I think about the company that we distribute through into the mining sector. As our company grew, our relationship with that company grew much stronger, so that it was not just a relationship between James and the purchaser. It was a relationship between our logistics, internal logistics, and their logistics. But not just those people, other people as well, the account side. It was a very close working relationship, or still is a very close working relationship. And that applies to all of our customers, really. Something that I think is really important is when you get to know a customer, you want to get to know them at a deep level, or as deep a level as possible. Another example would be one customer who's relatively new to us in the agriculture sector. We've been very successful there because they see us as being able to provide solutions to them. We're making an adjuvant for them. Nominally, it is just blending of chemical and packing off. But as it turns out, we're able to manufacture most of the ingredients. We're able to label the product in such a way that to meet their quality requirements. We can package it and deliver it wherever they want. So again, it's a very close relationship, and I know that company has a lot of support for us.
Yeah, and so you're actually helping them further up the value chain than just making an intermediate chemical.
That's right, much further up.
Produce them effectively a finished good, which
yes,
means that you're more useful to them.
Yes.
And it reduces more handoffs, which makes their life easier and reduces their internal costs associated with it.
That's right, well. Yep. And I guess for many years we thought of ourselves as just being manufacturers, but I think it's more and more that that's a mistake to look at it that way, or was a mistake. We're really very much service providers. And actually we're about to see that see that actually happen in a way, because one of our key chemicals we're going to outsource, and we'll be just blending it with other ingredients now, and it doesn't matter. We might nominally lose a little bit of margin, but the most important thing is we make our margin more on the service we provide relative to some of our competitors. Yeah, and in doing that, you're actually better servicing your customers. Yes, because it makes you higher value to them. That's right. Yeah, which also builds resilience into the relationship. Oh yes, definitely does. Because how would you describe the chemical market in Australia for your products at the moment? Would you just describe it as being competitive, or? Oh, it's reasonably competitive. Yeah. Look, we have manufacturing competitors who, particularly in the early years, really worried me. I thought that there's two in particular I saw as being really cutthroat operators who could just make something for very low margins. And strangely enough, we managed to hold on to business. And I think it was because of it. Well, I know it's because of that service aspect. We're seen to be credible to our customers. Yeah. The business has grown from really almost literally a garage operation to now pretty much a really substantial business, highly credible, valued by its customers and respected by its customers, but also by your peers. What have been some of the stuff-ups along the way, and how have you handled them? Well, I think, I've already mentioned it, but the biggest one was probably spending a lot of effort trying to get into the textile industry. Yeah. It's, I thought I understood the application of the product. It was a lubricant after all, a carding lubricant. And as a mechanical engineer, I understood that requirement very well. I was maybe a little bit weak on the chemistry, but we still had a product that I thought should go very well. That's probably one of the biggest ones. And that was mainly because whilst you fell in love with the product, you didn't understand the cost to the customer of change. That's right. Would that be fair? Cost to the customer of change, the perception of us by the customer as not being a textile industry supplier. Yeah. So that was one. Any other startups in particular, I guess we were very weak on the engineering early on. And, we could have done some things a lot better in terms of product quality or even safety. We could have had better systems in place. I did fairly early on, actually at my father's suggestion, we put on a part-time basis an engineer that he had worked with in his days in the petrochemical industry in Australia. And this engineer, I think he's about 10 years older than me, was a great mentor from an engineering perspective. And I learned a lot of engineering over a decade or 2 decades actually from this guy. Yeah. So that was another type of mentor I didn't mention, but they're very important actually. Just not so much a stuff up at a gradual change in the company. I think James and I knew what sort of culture we wanted in the company. We are people who like to look after our staff, reward them as appropriate, and we want people to be, particularly in our industry, we want people to be honest and straightforward. If they make a mistake, for example, we want to know about it so we can strive for better performance or not do it again.
Yeah.
I found that, look, certainly in the early days, it perhaps wasn't so difficult because we're a very small team, we're all very much on the same page. But later on, as the company got bigger, I think there might even be, there's probably theories on this, but once you get to a certain size, people form into different social groups.
Yes.
So getting that culture across the company was probably not my skill. And in later years, actually, not too many years ago, we appointed someone else to run the company. Our operations manager ultimately became the CEO. And she has actually been much better than me in instilling that culture and values across the company than I've ever been. Perhaps another point I should mention too is the importance of delegation. I don't think I'm someone who really holds on to things a huge amount, but I still did sometimes hold on to jobs that I shouldn't or should have let go and let someone else to do. That was probably I can't think of any particular examples where it's been a stuff up, but it's probably held us back a little bit sometimes.
Well, it's an important learning, but you don't often realise it until you actually have handed something over, usually because of necessity, as opposed to structured desire, and then you realise how much more successful and effective you can be as a result of that.
Yes.
And also how you can stretch and grow and empower people and watch them develop as well, which I take a personal pride in. I think that's one of the roles that we have as leaders is to develop and grow people.
But that point about delegation, I should mention, I've also seen as a weakness in other staff in our company too. We had an operations manager who had two very competent people working under him, but he would not he would not give them more responsibility. And I think it was a mistake that James and I made to hold on to, or to not force him to let go of some of his work. And he was someone who just did everything, and a lot of it was in his head. And he could have done it more efficiently if he'd let go of some of it.
Yeah,
that was an important realization too, to look at how our staff are running the people who work under us. Yeah.
And it's one of those things that as you grow a business from 1 to 2 to 5 to 10 to 20 to 50 people, as you said before, you do go through those cultural shifts because 1 to 2, it's basically 2 buddies working in a business.
That's right.
2 to 5, it's 2 buddies and a couple of mates working in a business. And it's pretty easy for you all to be on the same page. And if one of them isn't, then they'll probably actually exit by themselves, or you'll exit them with them.
Yeah.
And you'll find someone who's more on your same page.
Yes.
And so the culture is sort of revolving and morphing, but it has at its core something that's pretty easy to influence. As you go from 5 to 10, all of a sudden you start to realise that, when you have 7, 8, 9, 10 direct reports, all of a sudden the lines of communication start to become more complex and a bit more fractured. And there's a lot more work required to be communicating and stay on the same page. All of a sudden, when you go from 10 to 20, then it's a big deal, because all of a sudden you've probably got 3 teams of 7 with somebody who actually has to be taking the lead. And that's not necessarily the CEO, because even at 20, the CEO has probably still got a core role within the business. But there are at least 2, 3, 4, 5 teams that need to be communicated to. And there's a delegation of authority. There's an empowerment of those leaders who can manage their staff. And it can be uncomfortable for a leader to actually step back from that and let their managers or their leaders lead. Then, of course, go past 20 to 50, then you're in a completely different game. Because now we've actually got small business units within one business. You've actually got layer management. And whilst it's ideal, or it might seem ideal to have as flat a structure as possible, by default, there's going to be little clusters that are in different areas.
I guess as the company gets bigger, each person can only know an increasingly smaller amount of what's happening. So that's another reason why communication has to improve. One's own sphere of influence gets diminished as the company grows.
It does, and that actually is a time when it actually tests the strength of a culture.
Yes.
And it's actually important to actually define what that culture is. What is the Tritech way? How is it that we do things around here? What do we care about? Well, we care about green chemistry. We care about the environment. We care about our staff. We care about doing the right things. We care about doing what we say we're going to do. Those sorts of things. All of those, I think, are important parts of the way you've defined your culture.
Yes, they are. Yes.
And I think that's something that you've consciously done over the last sort of 5 to 8 years is to actually define the culture.
Yes.
Do you want to talk more about that?
We did, probably goes back to, I think, pre-COVID, we started to look at the company culture and come up with a set of values. We didn't do much with it for a little while, but after COVID, we revisited that and started to put a lot more work into how do we get this culture across to the whole company. We employed another person to assist with that in a HR role, working part-time. She's been great at holding workshop sessions for the whole company. But I think also our current CEO is taking that even further. She's just very good at holding meetings with people and just developing a rapport across the whole company, whereas I tend to do, perhaps I was probably too aligned at the engineering side of the company. That was my skill and didn't really spend enough time with other people, I think. So,
Yeah, and I think that having a champion of the culture, indeed the CEO as champion of the culture, has actually been an essential step forward for Tritech as you've gone forward.
I do remember a couple of missteps along the way with culture too. There have been the odd occasion where we've found someone who just doesn't really fit. We had someone in the chemistry team who was just incredibly disruptive. In fact, we had 2, and while they potentially had something to offer, they were so disruptive to the rest of the company that ultimately, they had to go. We had an operations manager in production, was a great plant operator, a great micromanager who could really run the plant very well, but he stifled everyone else's initiative. And that was an example of poor culture because he didn't really let other people speak for themselves and didn't develop them. So that was relatively early on. That's probably going back about 10 years.
Yes.
So we're certainly aware of the need to improve the culture to be a more open and inclusive type of arrangement. So
I think that's a really important point because quite often we sometimes tolerate for too long people whose behaviour is at odds with the culture that we want.
Well, yes, we did. I tolerated that behaviour for quite some time because we were still getting goods made and made fairly well, I guess. And that was enough for me. In retrospect, what I should have done was spend more time consulting and talking and perhaps even asking for development of KPIs, which I didn't really do. But I sort of let that, by then I'd let the production side be a silo on its own and I wasn't too involved with that. I was more involved in the engineering with building new plants, not so much how the production was being run. So that's a learning, I guess, that as a CEO or a manager, one has to really consult with one reports and find out what's going on and get to the bottom of issues or find out if there are any issues.
Yeah, well, it's certainly something that I've seen time and again across my clients is that hanging on to somebody who's a high performer, but actually completely at odds. So I remember a business a few years ago, their highest performing salesperson by a substantial margin was really toxic, fantastic in front of the client and abhorrent in front of his staff and the people around him. And, there was always that question around, well, we can't afford to lose him because he's 20% of our revenue.
Yes.
But by the same token, we're having to we're either having to deal with from staff or we're having to actually change staff because they were leaving. People don't leave an organisation, they leave their manager.
Yeah.
And they were certainly doing that.
Yeah.
And in that particular case, through a process of counselling, we got him to really understand that that his behaviour was not going to be tolerated and that wasn't acceptable. And to his credit, and this is highly unusual, he actually was able to actually modify his behaviour and actually learn to become more effective as a team player. On the other hand, what typically happens is, we tolerate someone by tolerating their behaviour, we're effectively endorsing it.
That's right.
There's a fantastic saying, that which we overlook is what we accept.
Mm.
And so people sort of see that, if their bad behaviour is being accepted, is being overlooked, well, then it must be acceptable. And so typically there is a point where we just have to draw a line, either start a performance management process or exit that person so that the organisation can move on. And typically when those people move on, which is usually the outcome of performance management, because they can't change, because people are pretty well locked in stone in their personalities, that the immediate response from their team members, I've seen it so many times, the immediate response from their team members is, what took you so long?
Yes.
We've been carrying this person or tolerating this for months, years, usually it's years.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's only then that you start to see how much damage and strain you've been putting on the business and the teams within it, because the business is just going.
Yeah.
And so I tend to be, when my clients start to get niggles about cultural issues, I'm more inclined to push for them to act fast.
Yep.
Because I know they'll be resistant because it's uncomfortable, having these sorts of uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, there is a bit of fear
and fear of
change.
Will there be a negative impact on the business? Well, often there is a difficult period. You've got to go and find someone to replace them. You can find someone better. You've got to bed them in.
Yes.
It's going to take you 6 months, but you're better off starting that 6 months now than waiting 12 months and then having to replace 2 of their staff.
Yes. Yeah.
Or have to pick up the pieces.
Yeah.
So I guess that's an important one.
Yeah. I guess as the company grows, it becomes harder for a senior manager to actually see what's happening all throughout the company, or see how people behave. And there were some behaviours done by 1 or 2 people at the operations level that I actually didn't see for a while. I was too far removed from it. But I guess that highlights the need to have good managers who really can see that and question and find out what's happening. Wasn't really my strength.
Yeah. But probably one of the most important things that I see in leaders is self-awareness and being able to understand what are the things that they excel at, that they find effortless, that other people find difficult, but also to realise what it is that they don't do well. Yes. And take steps, not necessarily to correct their own behaviour, but to actually find people that can actually compensate for it.
Yes.
Or be their counter.
Yes.
And you recognise that, you were an excellent engineer, but you didn't have great technical knowledge and you weren't a great salesperson. And so finding James, who actually was really strong in those things, but actually not particularly good in engineering or operations management. And that's no discredit to him, but that's actually not what was required for what's turned out to be a really beautiful partnership where you both brought something really important to the process, different personalities, different skill sets, and from what I've observed, a really deep mutual respect, because you work very effectively as a team.
We have, yes, we've worked extremely well over a long time now. Yeah.
Are you looking to pinpoint the areas that will make the biggest impact on your business? Check out the Organisation Performance and Value Diagnostic. This powerful tool lets you evaluate your business on multiple facets and provides email reminders to keep you on track. Head over to CriticalFewActions.com.au and get started now. So, can you think of any game changers that have really changed your business for the better?
Well, I guess having James on board was a particularly big game changer, but it was a gradual awareness that I lacked a lot of skills and needed to bring in other skills. Probably the single biggest game changer. Now, I look at one of our competitors. As I said, we've got a couple of low-cost competitors. I know one of them, the manager there, is still running the plant in many cases, and that was an extreme example of not letting go and not delegating. So having an awareness of skills and developing that awareness of skills or lack of skills, and knowing the lack of skills is as important as knowing what you are skillful at. That's been a game changer. And coming on from that, being able to develop a strategy and culture, largely with the help of you, and others that we've employed along the way, that they have been game changers as well. Yeah. So tell me about the role of vision and strategy over the last
10 or 15 years. How's that helped you?
Vision has been important in aligning, particularly aligning everybody in the company to make sure we're all on the same page, but particularly the people in the office, the finance staff, sales staff, everyone really. How can I better put that? We have a vision to grow the company by a certain percentage per year. It means we have to put a fair bit of effort into developing new products, new markets. So there is a target to strive for the sales team. That's part of it. Part of that vision is also to maintain a good culture where people feel safe and secure, particularly psychologically safe, so they are willing to be part of a team. Without that, people wouldn't be, as interested in the job. And having that dedication to the work and to the company can only come from a shared vision. So it has been important to get that vision and the message of that across the whole team. Certainly the senior management team is well aware of the strategy we have for growing the company further. We know what areas we need to work on. For example, we have on our job description list or our diagram job positions, there are a couple of vacancies there. We actually know there's a couple of vacancies there which need to be filled. So that would only come about by knowing something about our strategy and vision for the future. And other people are aware of that. They know that there will be other people who will be part of the team in the future.
Yeah. And how has the process of developing the strategy been helpful for you?
The process of developing the strategy, it's helped us or helped me think about the future and take my mind away from the day-to-day matters. It makes me think about things that we have to do, not today, but the things we have to do tomorrow, next year. So it's helped with some decision making. So
good. Where do you see the business going from here?
I can see us being seen more and more as a supplier of chemicals and services to the mining and ag sectors in particular. I see us as being more embedded with the larger companies and expanding into further companies. We do have some very good prospects in both the mining and ag sectors at the moment. And of course, I realise that we don't always expect 100% of those to come off, but if a couple of those come off, then the business will still continue to grow. And it's doing so with me not being involved in the company anymore directly. I just have a board role now. I have an indirect influence. So I see that growing under the stewardship of our CEO. So there is the growth we've had over the last 30 years, I see it as continuing at probably even an accelerated rate for the next 5 years.
And I guess that sort of points to the ultimate form of delegation, where you've now stepped out of the business from a day-to-day perspective. You've handed the reins directly over to the CEO, and you have got both freedom of time and mind space to pursue your next career, but also look at this very much as an investment, as opposed to your day-to-day job.
That's right. Yes.
How's that transition been?
It's been good. I guess when I retired, I was not sure how I would go with letting go, because I still had control of the engineering side of the company. And I sometimes think to myself, I get to see some of the work that's happening, and occasionally I want to have some input. And I do have to not quite bite my tongue, but just be careful not to get too involved, because I know the staff there are doing a great job. Sometimes I might do things a little bit differently, but it doesn't really matter. I have been able to just to step back from all that detail and just look at the high level result of how the company is going. I think that's worked pretty well with that relationship between myself and the CEO, where I'll sometimes ask detailed questions more than I need to, but generally speaking, I've been happy with asking the higher level questions, and I think she has responded very well to that. So it's actually been a pretty good relationship, that director to CEO relationship. But it is a big change to make, because if I think about my career, I even learned how to weld, for example, and some other trade skills, plumbing, for example, and all that detail. And now I've just had to let go and think about the big picture of the way a company runs. Perhaps another bit of training I did that I should mention is, and I have to leverage on this a little bit more, but I did do the AICD Directors course, which is fantastic, I think, for teaching one about the roles of a director and how to operate a company from that high-level perspective. And I don't think that can be underrated for its importance.
Well, I think understanding the role of governance from an investor, shareholder director's perspective is an essential skill.
Mm. Yes. Yeah.
Just as I think having our CEOs appropriately skilled to relate to brief the directors is also an essential skill. So, I think they're definitely really important things. I think there's probably two things that sort of come to mind from that. One is both Fiona and James went through the CEO masterclass. Do you have a sense as to what the organisation got out of them having gone through that process?
I think a clearer picture of some of the details about how we're going to grow. Perhaps one that's come out of it is the realization that James is someone who hasn't let go of quite as much as he should have in his role. We recognise that he's extremely good at market development, or market development in particular, with a bit of chemistry, but he has needed to let go of the detail side of chemistry for a long time. And that, I think, has been holding him back. And I think that's actually been probably that realization has partly come about because of that, the work that Fiona and James have done on strategy. And that actually could be a very major change for the company, to free James up to do exactly what he is particularly good at and to rid him of the detail stuff that someone else did.
Yep, I think you're right. The other thing that comes to mind is this concept I often talk about, which is being exit ready. I often look at people who they go to put their house on the market, they recarpet, they tidy up the garden, they do a paint, they might do a bathroom renovation, get a spick and span, take out 20 years of stuff that's been actually hanging around the house to declutter it, and make it as inviting as possible for sale day. And I'm certain, as was the case with me, that when they look at their house, when it's getting ready for open inspection, they look at it and they think, "It's a fantastic house. I think we should stay here." And I think about that as in parallel to businesses about getting exit ready, which is very much around, okay, well, how do we prepare this business as if it was for sale? What do we need to do from an operations perspective, a financial performance perspective, from having the right people in our leadership team in place? How do we make sure that we've secured our customers and a good supply chain so that the business is performing as well as it can over a 3-year period? When you sell a business, you have to have a 3-year financial record. And so I like to challenge to start that 3-year journey of growth so that they have a choice as to whether or not they choose to sell or whether they choose to actually be an investor in their business because it's getting great returns. How has exit ready been important for you?
I think you might have mentioned that concept, being exit ready is one way to run a company, going back 12 years or more. That is a concept for running a company. And I think also perhaps our accountant, who was an advisor at one stage, mentioned the same thing. You can look at a company, or you can run a company as if you were prepared to sell at any time. I thought I'd understood it at the time and thought it was just having the company running as good as it possibly could, doing the best one can with sales, new products coming on, development. But it's only relatively recently I realised there's much more to it than that. And the single most important thing, I think, is to make sure that the team and the company is exit ready. So if you are still working as an owner in the company and you sell the company, what happens then? What's a buyer going to think of the company if you're still working there?
Yeah,
it might still work, but one's going to have a different motivation if one becomes an employee versus an investor. Or perhaps a better way to look at it is, as an owner of the company, and if I want to be exit ready, I've got to make sure I'm replaceable.
Yes.
Or have myself replaced.
Yeah.
Or perhaps the only other way it might work would be to maybe maintain a little bit of equity or have a commitment to stay on for some time. But the buyer has to be able to, any potential buyer has to look at the company and see that there are no personnel risks, including the owners.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. If we were going back in time and talking to Greg as he was just starting out, what advice would you give young Greg all those years ago, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, that's a big question. Look, the cliched answer, and really the cliched answer is work on the business, not in the business. But I'll mention it because I'm probably very similar to a lot of people in that I got into business because I had skills maybe not directly related, but close enough to what the business does. So one might have skills in, say, retailing, for example, knows how to sell, operate a shopfront. But in the case of most businesses, that skill you have for the operational side is not a skill in running a business. So I think from a very early stage, one has to learn about what a business is. And it's partly about acquiring new skills oneself, but it's also about finding out where you can get those skills or how you can delegate to get those skills. Perhaps the most important one I learned from an early stage was understanding financial management. I know that's a detail, but it is so critical to a business that I got a huge amount out of that.
Yep.
I think understanding, and perhaps the other most critical one too, is understanding safety in a business. And even in a non-manufacturing business, that's important because you have to look after the welfare of your staff it comes down to culture partly, but it comes down to all other aspects of psychological safety. So be very aware of how people are treating one another and how you treat them. They would be probably the most important things I could say. Work on the business.
Yeah. And finally, I guess, Greg, if you're speaking to a CEO that's looking to develop their business based on your experiences, what would be the critical few actions that they should start tomorrow if they did nothing else?
I think probably ask yourself, do you have the best people in their various roles in the company? That is really important. And perhaps it's something I could have mentioned earlier in this interview. It's probably one thing we did quite well reasonably early on was to find very good people. Might even mean changing the role of people in the company as well. So that's absolutely critical, having good people. I think also try to get a view about how your customers and how the market looks at you or looks at your company. That's probably, it sounds obvious, but I think it's really important. Spend some time examining that. And I think particularly as a company gets bigger, look at the vision and strategy for the company and get an understanding of where you're going. If you don't do that, then I think growth is stifled and you just end up just drifting.
Yeah.
So that's three things that I think are fairly critical. I mean, there are lots of others that I guess that they come to mind.
Greg, I think that's fantastic. Greg, thank you so much for sharing your story, your insights, and the learnings that you've had over the last 30 years as you've developed this business from really a backyard operation to something that is internationally recognised and an important part of the Australian manufacturing, mining and agricultural landscape.
Well, as always, John, it's been a really nice to talk to you and great pleasure. And your advice has been fantastic all the way. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Critical Few Actions podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and grab the downloadables from the show notes. And if you found this episode helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you share it with your peers and your team. Stay focused and take action. The Critical Few Actions podcast, including show notes and links, provides general information only and is not individualised business advice, nor can it be relied upon as such. You must take responsibility for your own advice, decisions, and actions.